So, Russia's Putin continues to probe, pushing provocation to new levels, testing NATO like we've never really seen before. Russian jets are cruising into Allied airspace more frequently. Drones are buzzing and striking into Poland and Romania. And Europe as a collective is scrambling with how to respond, pursuing more economic warfare like sanctions, all the while Washington just watches, indifferent or perhaps even gleefully. Each violation, one might argue, looks relatively small on their own, but it's together that they symbolise something far bigger. NATO's inability, unwillingness, complacency, or even reluctance to respond decisively. Whatever word you prefer to choose, any of this is creating the conditions for something far worse down the line. So in this video, I wanted to unpack even more about Russia's renewed air incursions, what these NATO Eastern Sentinel plans might be, and why the EU's latest sanctions push, despite what you might think, is not enough, and why this will be such a big deal in ways you might not have even considered.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where we are returning once again to Eastern Europe, given the rapidity and magnitude, frequency of these air incursions by the Kremlin into NATO airspace and the rather, worrying inaction by NATO. But before I dive into details, I want to hear your take. Do you think Europe's sanctions or NATO potential patrols will actually be enough deterrence to Putin? Or is Moscow simply proving how weak the West or Europe more broadly without America actually is? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I'm very curious how you see this. So let's start with the renewed alert for sanctions package. The EU is announcing a 19th round after a week of wrangling, delayed because of Trump making, nearly impossible demands for Europe to basically cut off all Russian energy immediately and slap tariffs on China and India, something you may have seen in the news before. Now, Brussels couldn't go that far, mainly because of the way the EU works. Each member state has its own bilateral relations, and, there are a lot of opt-outs or caveats, which make it difficult for a supranational organisation like the EU versus a singular nation state to behave as easily as the US. But that said, the EU has put forward a package that goes after three main baskets. 1, energy, 2, finance, and 3, the defence industrial base. On Friday, the European Union proposed a bring forward of its ban on Russian gas imports by a year. So basically what that means is to end purchases of all Russian LNG by January 2027 instead of 2028. Now, that is a dramatic shift for a continent that has once relied on Russian gas for about 45%. Now, today that figure is down to 19, but of course that dependency does linger, and some countries are the fly in the ointment. Hungary, Slovakia, even Austria aren't. But von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, was blunt. It's time to turn off the tap. We know that our sanctions are an effective tool of economic pressure, and we'll keep using them until Russia comes to the negotiation table with Ukraine for just and lasting peace. Zelensky, president of Ukraine, welcomed the move, calling it robust. But you have to, as always, look at the numbers. This channel is not about just purely narratives, it's also about factuality, and the numbers tell a different story. Moscow still earns €500 million a day from fossil fuel sales to Europe. And much of that gas is locked in long-term contracts with France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, three of the more hawkish countries towards supplying Ukraine with support, much of it flowing through Germany as well. These states carry weight in Brussels also, and so that slows any potential rapid cutoff. The package also blacklists another 118 shadow tankers, something I plan to do a video on, Russia's dark fleet or shadow fleet. And, it also plans to crack down on crypto workarounds and signals against third-party suppliers of defense materials. Brussels has also floated a potential way to tap into that infamous 300 billion in frozen Russian assets located across various different central banks in Europe and elsewhere. So this isn't just about energy. Brussels is also planning to ban Russian banks and financial institutions entirely, hitting at Moscow's ability to use crypto as a workaround. And in a nod, somewhat, to Trump's demands, von der Leyen has promised to go after the buyers of Russian energy products. specifically refineries and petrochemical firms in China, though she gave no specifics yet. But here's the reality. Without the reach of the US Treasury and dollar system, at least for now, enforcement is limited. Only Washington can put real teeth into sanctions. Yet since Trump took office, obviously the US has taken no steps, and if anything, has actually reverted some of them. The Senate does have a sweeping sanctions bill in hand, but it's been shelved at the White House. Unsurprising request. The growing split between Europe and the United States matters even more than we've covered in the past 8-9 months of Trump's second administration. Europe's incremental onslaught stands in sharp contrast to Washington's pacificity. And while Europe keeps ratcheting pressure, only the dollar-based financial system can truly paralyze Russian trade. America's dollar represents still around 60% of reserve currency, and Europe's about 20%. But there are plans with the idea of a Eurobond, and for Europe to increasingly take share of that reserve currency, as Trump, even in his announcement of making it $100,000 to become a H-1B visa holder, someone that I actually had to do from a personal experience, shows you that he will implode America in his current trajectory. All the while, possibility for Europe to therefore step up. All that aside, therefore, there is also the politics, as I said. Hungary, Slovakia, both friendly to Moscow, have blocked sanctions before. Turkey, a NATO member, continues to buy cheap Russian energy. Once again, Brussels is expected to buy consensus. 500 million in EU funds for Hungary to smooth approval. If you want a bigger picture on this, then do consider checking out another video I did exactly about sanctions between the Americans and other countries where tariffs have been being hit. So, in all midst of this, also on Friday morning, 3 Russian MiG-31 jets violated Estonian airspace for about 12 minutes, entering from the northeast and intercepted first by Finnish jets over the Gulf of Finland before Italian A-5s based in Estonia also escorted them out. NATO described it as, quote, yet another example of reckless Russian behavior and NATO's ability to respond. Interestingly, the Estonian government said the Russian jets had no flight plans, their transponders were turned off, and they made no radio contract with air traffic control, something known otherwise as a ghost plane. In other words, a textbook provocation. Russia's defense ministry obviously dismissed the charge, claiming the jets flew over neutral waters more than 3 kilometers from Venindulu Island. Estonia's Prime Minister, Kersti Michal, demanded urgent consultations under Article 4 of NATO's founding treaty. This was the second time Article 4 has been requested in just a couple of weeks, with Poland obviously triggering on September 10th after Russian drones crossed its border. Michal insisting that NATO's response to any provocation must be united and strong. Interestingly, also, this was Estonia's 5th airspace violation just this year. But officials said it was the most serious one yet. And indeed, if you look at it relative to previous ones we've had, it is far different and much bigger in, military scale. It comes on the heels of the repeated Russian drone incursions, 19 in a single night in Poland, and Romania also detecting Russian drones in its airspace near the Danube. Belarus even claimed that drones strayed into Polish airspace accidentally due to jamming, though questions remain along the real loyalty of Lukashenko, given his relationship to Trump and also Putin. Foreign Minister of Estonia compared Russia's approach to the boiling frog, basically gradually escalating provocations to test NATO's limits. Former UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace also echoed the concern, arguing NATO must impose a, quote, strategic dilemma to show provocations carry cost. The historical parallels are chilling. In 2015, Turkey shot down a Russian jet after a brief incursion. One pilot was killed and relations collapsed entirely. But war was avoided, largely because it was already over Syria and because Russia was largely focused elsewhere. Would NATO have the same outcome today if it pulled the trigger? Certainly not, given its over airspace in Europe and, the context of the whole war in Ukraine. Trump himself even did, though, weigh in, saying, I don't love it, I don't like when that happens, could be big trouble. Profound sentiments there from the POTUS. His words were deliberately vague, some argue at least, and that ambiguity is exactly what Moscow wants. Many in Europe fear that if NATO downed a Russian plane, Trump would see it as an unnecessary escalation, blame Europe for that fallout, and, threaten withholding support even under an Article 5 scenario. That would be a nightmare for Europe and an absolute dream for the Kremlin. To understand how NATO red lines work sometimes, and the ones that Putin seems to argue, You can find other videos on the channel about, well, Putin's psychology when it comes to these things. So do check those out. Now, obviously, we have to wonder the calculus. Why now? Well, it's, for me, quite simple. Putin is running high after a very successful August, being legitimized on the international stage, meeting the world's most powerful country, and not really getting any reprimands for his escalation in strikes within Ukraine proper. So, well, he thinks, how far can I push this? Let's see what I can do with NATO even more, especially if NATO's going to be reduced in its support by US funding or military presence, then, well, this is the prime time. That's why Russia has launched record-breaking drone and wave missiles attacks. In one attack, Ukraine reported 810 Shahed drones, the largest swarm in a singular night since the invasion began. The strategy is therefore quite clear. Bleed Ukraine's defences dry through just sheer volume. Distract NATO with incursions into Poland, Romania, and Estonia. Get them more focused on their own domestic troubles, their own national security, at the expense of attention and support to Ukraine. And then, to top it off, of course, Putin continues to dangle that false diplomacy, telling Trump that he might meet Zelensky, but only in Moscow. There will eventually be meetings together, but they're not actually doing so. That's not negotiation, that's humiliation, that's manipulation. This playbook isn't new. Russia has long done this to test the boundaries to see how much the West as a collective, as NATO as an entity, will tolerate. From Georgia in 2008, to Crimea in 2014, to Syria, even, you could argue, in 2015, the lesson Putin draws is simple. Escalate, wait for Western hesitation or any response or inaction, then pocket the gains and do it again after a little bit of time and, well, sort of a degree of growing used to it has occurred. So, in all of this, and as you hear for those of you who are regular, my biggest concern is obviously about Europe as a whole. We need to be able to rid our over-dependency on the big three, as they're otherwise known. Quote Joseph Borrell, the former foreign minister of the European Union, when he said we need to rid our dependency on US security assurances, big cheap markets of China, and big energy from Russia. That is very much the case, the strategic autonomy. On the one hand, the sanctions are accelerating. Europe is trying to really up the ante there, cutting fuel ties, targeting financial lifelines, and trying to choke off support from China and India as well. But on the other hand, the EU versus NATO, they face daily testings of their defences, each incident carrying the risk of miscalculation. There's also the wider split, the transatlantic relationship largely being in the bin. And Europe is pressing forward with sanctions. Imperfect, incremental. You can find a video I had with an expert on sanctions and historical examples, if you want, on the channel. Washington, meanwhile, though, has done little more than just pressure India with tariffs. That divergence matters, obviously, because without the United States backing, sanctions lack that global bite for what I've described earlier. Trump has even admitted as much. Standing next to the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer this week, he said that Putin had, quote, let him down, insisted he would do nothing until Europe moved first. That's not leadership, that's hesitation dressed as leverage, that's ineptitude, that's complacency, that's inertia. The uncomfortable truth, therefore, that Putin believes he can escalate without consequence, and unless Europe-specific proves him wrong, that belief will only grow. My crudest opinion is that Europe has to step up faster and faster than we are already doing. We're doing it, and it is happening, but we need to do it even more. We need to not kid ourselves or keep holding out some echelons of parts of Brussels, continuing to hold on for a shade of hope that maybe Trump can still be brought around, when clearly that's not the case. He has no interest in anything other than, well, completely centralizing his control and censoring freedom of speech in the United States. As someone who lived there for 5 years, I can tell you, plain and simple, what is happening. His lawsuit against the New York Times, the continued shutting down of Jimmy Kimmel and other things, is completely harrowing. He's doing as much as he can to emulate Viktor Orban of Hungary, as much as he can within the US existing systems to minimize scrutiny of his administration, but also bolster the, well, basis by which he can do what he wants, even though largely most of the time he has no idea. So in the case of Ukraine and broader Europe, this is more important than ever. Two strongmen on both sides, one on the United States and one in Russia. Not something that we ever thought we'd have to deal with. But what do you think? Do these sanctions and air patrols really deter Russia? I mean, that's kind of an easy question, I think. Or is Moscow just going to continue to leverage it? But how far more can Putin do this? Let me know in the comments below. If you don't know me, my name is Pyotr Kurzin. I'm a mix of English and Russian, having been brought up in the West with influences from the Slavic world. I've been trained in international relations, strategic studies, and economics at the University of Johns Hopkins SAIS. I've worked with diplomats, I've advised UN missions, and I've reported from front lines in Ukraine. And I've also now been bringing that to this channel by interviewing diplomats, economists, analysts, activists, and many more to try to be as comprehensive and understanding of the complex world around us. If that resonates with you, then do consider subscribing and sharing this video with anyone else who you think will enjoy it. And until then, we'll see you in the next one. Take care.